I'm Brian Katz. You're here for I Need a Mobile Strategy 2. Let me start with a slight disclaimer here. If you have any comments, questions, or just want to flame, Jack Mannon's got the session right after me where he's going into more depth. One of my goals of this session is to make him rewrite the slides in the next hour. So feel free to ask questions, whatever you want. Anything we can do to make him take the computer out and write means we're succeeding. Okay? So let me tell you a little bit about who I am. Easiest way to reach me, first of all, on Twitter is @BMKatz. For those of you that have seen me before, at least on Twitter, but not in real life, you've probably seen this avatar. This should tell you a little bit of something about myself. I'm an avid soccer fan, so if you do follow me during the Premier League season, you'll see a lot of tweets about Manchester United and the English Premier League. People like Colin, a couple others get in on that. And when I come to conferences, I'm Statler. The hat moves, but I like to heckle a lot, and a couple people here participate, so you'll usually see me with something with the soccer ball on. But really, all I am is just a nutter with a blog. Pretty simple. A lot of people think I'm a little nuts. So with screwsloose.com, I write a lot about mobility, BYOD, mobile strategy, all those sorts of things. Pretty simple to find. It's also part of my Twitter profile. And so what's my day job? I work at Sanofi Pharmaceuticals. I am director of mobile engineering. I've been doing that for the last 2 years. Before that, I was a server architect at Sanofi for 8 years. And then I was an exchange architect at Merrill Lynch for about 4.5 years. And I started out actually as a teacher. So I spent a couple years teaching, doing computer consulting on the side. And so been in the business a long time. Been using mobile devices. I got a couple up here for demos we're going to do later. But been using mobile devices since the very first BlackBerry. So I was one of the people who brought BlackBerry into Merrill Lynch. And we've come a long way, haven't we? The goal here is to be interactive. So you have a question, just ask. We have a microphone. If you're not loud enough, I'll repeat the question. Stop me. We're going to do a short overview of the different technologies, MDM, Maam, MIM. We'll spend a slide on mobile virtualization. We'll talk about my favorite, and this is one of the things, the challenge I have for you guys. We're going to talk about crapplications, and the goal is to get crapplications trending on Twitter, along with BriForum, so include the BriForum hashtag. But we will talk about crapplications a fair amount during this session, because if you understand this, you understand FUIT, you understand what's going on, and this is what we deal with all the time. So I'm going to start out with a couple questions. How many of you have a mobile strategy in your company in place right now? Just a show of hands. Okay, about 8. How many of you have a BYOD strategy at your firm? 1, 2, 3. Wow. So for the 3 of you, how many of you have a BYOD strategy that's email only? Anybody? I'll give you a hint. That means, I got 1 there. That means BlackBerry or good enterprise mobile messaging. That is not BYOD. We'll talk a little bit about that. Anybody here have an MDM solution in place? Wow. 3. Harry, that's not fair. You don't have an MDM solution in place. You should have it. You should be able to raise your hand for the next one. How many of you have a Maam solution in place? Anybody besides the AppSense people over here? 1. Okay. Last set of questions. How many of you are iOS only at work? Excluding BlackBerry. You can have BlackBerry, but how many are only 1 device? Anybody? Wow. How many of you are Android only? How many of you are Android and iOS and have them all? Are the rest of you BlackBerry users? Okay. And last one. Anyone here have a Windows phone? 1? Two Windows phones. So we have, I'd say that's about maybe 2% of the people in here have Windows phones. That about follows the norm of where we're going. So let's just talk a little bit about a glossary, because we're going to refer to these terms the whole time. MDM is mobile device management. MAM is mobile application management. MIM is mobile information management. If you haven't taken the Brian Madden quiz, that's one of the questions. EMM, enterprise mobility management. That incorporates the whole gamut. It's dealing with everything. BYOD, hopefully you know, is bring your own device. And then we have something that a lot of you probably haven't heard of, which is COPE, which is the opposite model of bring your own device. Corporate-owned, personal enabled. So we'll spend a slide or two talking about that. So let's hit MDM. And this may be where we want to start getting a little bit interactive. The easiest way to understand MDM is you control the device. You own it. It's legacy IT. It's major functionality, full device wipe. Someone loses their device, you can delete everything on it. Enterprise wipe. That means all the applications that you as an enterprise installed. Get rid of those. Get rid of the enterprise data. Lock and unlock the phone. How many people have had somebody on a BlackBerry lose their passcode or forget their passcode and they don't want to wipe the device? If you're using MDM, you can actually clear the passcode and they have to recreate it, both Android and iOS. You can lock a device if they misplace it, but they're not willing to say that it's lost. You can do these sorts of things with MDM. Whitelist and blacklist applications. Control cloud access. You can turn iCloud off if you have iOS. You can turn Dropbox and other things off if you have Android. So you can actually control that actual cloud access. And that last one's supposed to be in red, but GPS location. Anyone know, I apologize it's not in red, but anybody know why I had GPS location in red? Because they all do it. GPS location is very important from the perspective of if you're an international company, you can't use it in a lot of places. You go over to Europe, you can't track your people. And it invades privacy laws, there are legal issues around it. You can actually be sued and pay quite a hefty fine just for turning that on. But that is one of the features that is available. The big thing about, and I knew people would like this, Gartner Magic Quadrant. You have about 20 people in here. There are over 50 MDM vendors. By the way, Microsoft got into it recently, so they have a new product. It's Infuse, if I remember the name. Intune. You have Fusion from BlackBerry. You have all these different models of people who are entering here and people who are too small to appear on the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And the best part is everybody's buying these people up. So what is MDM? In reality, MDM is legacy thinking. It's the same thing of if you have a corporate laptop back there, it's locked down, it's controlled. It's the thing that drives people nuts when they can't get out to the firewall, can't get through the proxy. It takes 5 minutes to boot up because it's got antivirus, it's got group policy, it's got everything else on it. It's this model. It doesn't work very well in BYOD. And yet, you look at every MDM vendor, Mobile Iron, ZenPrize, AirWatch, Boxtone, even BlackBerry, they'll tell you, of course we can solve BYOD for you. That's what we do. They don't. They're lying to you. It is not a solution for that. It's bringing a sledgehammer to a scalpel fight. And you'll understand why. For those of you that sat through the AppSense presentation where they showed their Maam, which we're going to talk about next, now you're starting to get in there and you're starting to carve out what you need to do when you have BYOD, or you just want to, you have a personal device. How do you control that? It's what leads to FUIT. For those of you that read Jack, read my blog, or just are following the rags, MDM's dead. It's been dead for a while now. You know, I published something about this about 9 months ago. Then you got this from Todd Morrison. I know Jack has one. I couldn't actually find Jack's. But my favorite is this bottom one, which is the Yankee Group Technology Roadmap. My boss sent this to me this morning. I actually had it in the presentation yesterday because I showed it to Jack. But my boss sent this to me this morning and said, what's going on here? Why am I getting this? And It was sponsored by Boxstone, Yankee Group, it's an analyst company. But people are beginning to realize, including the MDM vendors, that what they have, remember that first page? That's all functionality. I like to make an analogy to SMS about it. If you remember SMS in 2002, SMS was everything. You could remote control your device, you could catalog the software, you could do a bunch of things, heavy-handed, didn't always work, but if you look at what happened a couple years later, SCCM came out, and all those features that were so necessary with SCM became functionality. And that functionality is going to get wrapped up in Maam, MIM, and the future technologies, but it's just functionality. And that's how you start to get rid of that sledgehammer and start moving down to a hatchet, a knife, and eventually that scalpel. Any questions on MDM before we talk about Maam? MDM is not dead in the face of the CTO and the CIO, mostly because it's what everybody writes about. It's where the news is. Nobody started talking about Maam till late last year. You'll see in a couple of slides, I actually talk about some of the vendors who've been doing it for a year and a half now. AppSense bought one of them. But it's difficult for people to change. We all know that. That's why we're at this conference. We talk about FUIT all the time. They want to look at it that's the same as owning a computer. By the way, I'm practicing what I preach right now. This is an iPad. If I want to use this as a computer, I have an ultra-thin Logitech keyboard. Love it. Yes, I'm advertising. I run it from my iPhone. So I actually have a preview of all the slides. I can watch it. I can put it up here. I can do everything that I'm doing with stuff that I own. This is my own iPhone, by the way. Although I actually have a work one, too. I don't really use the work one. But the only way that's going to change, Harry, is people here understanding what Maam is and going back to the CTO. And really the way that's going to change, and we'll talk about it with BYOD, BYOD is failing. People here are talking about it all the time, but when you talk about managing BYOD, there was a company recently that bought 13,000 licenses to an MDM vendor. They have 13,000 people with devices. They put out the policies of what they were going to do to these devices. They had 800 people sign up. They can't figure out how to get the other 12,200 people to sign up and use their device at work. Why? Because it's too draconian. It's, I'm going to lock this down. But wait, this is my device. So let's talk a little bit about Maam. Easiest way to understand Maam is you've gone from this sledgehammer to really this knife. You're now carving out just around the app. You can control the app. You have some MDM functionality. Yeah, you can wipe the device, but most times you don't have to. Because I can wipe a single app off it. I can wipe a series of apps off it. I can control the data that goes to those apps. I don't have to own the whole phone. It's great for enterprise apps, apps that you build. It allows a lot more flexibility than MDM. So how does Maam work? Maam works that you usually get an SDK and they do something called app wrapping. So they give you an API in your SDK that when you're building your app, you incorporate it, and it does things like allows you to encrypt the sandbox, turn on sandbox encryption if it's iOS. It may create encryption if you have an older Android device. It may activate some of this is a Samsung device, it may activate the Samsung Safe APIs, which allow you to do encrypted sandboxes. It may provide you with the ability to do a SSL VPN tunnel. It may encrypt the data there. All that stuff's built into an API, and it's got a similar control center as MDM. Those who saw the AppSense, you've got a nice feeling of that. And you look at some of the players who've been in it for a long time. You got Nakona, bought by Symantec. You got RapSphere, which was bought by AppSense. Anybody sensing a theme here? The big players are buying the small players because they're realizing Maam is the way to go. You have Good, who claims they've been doing Maam forever. They used to do it just email. They have a product called Good Dynamics, which wraps apps. You have Mokana, which is partnering with Aperion and a couple of other people. I don't know how long Mokana will stay independent. But then you have the other piece. Every MDM vendor who's figured out, oh shit, nobody wants me anymore because they're coming with BYOD. I told them I could do it and I can't because they're coming to me and saying my users won't deal with it. You're starting to see them build Maam into their products. If you're asking for who has the advantage, your top 4 have your advantage. There are 1 or 2 others, but those are the main ones. I think Harry and Mike might agree with me there. Because these guys started in Maam and built the functionality in, as opposed to the MDM vendors who have this legacy functionality and have to build Maam in. So it's a little bit different, but they definitely have a nice lead there. So why are you going to love it? We talked about all these things. Your users love this piece because they can hold this device, they can walk in, and they know that you don't have control of the whole thing. You can make a decision, but where that becomes difficult is, and this is a tough one, you have to explain this to security, because security will still say, well, what happens if the phone gets stolen? What if I can't wipe it quick enough? What if I can't pull those apps off? What if it's taken offline? I like to tell security it's no different than if I steal a laptop, or I take a USB key, or I have MDM. It doesn't change the fact of how that works. A couple other drawbacks. It doesn't work with public apps unless the Maam vendor has partnered with them. QuickOffice is a great example of that. QuickOffice has partnered with almost every Maam vendor out there to incorporate their SDK so that they can manage it. There are a couple others that are doing that. You're going to see a lot of the Maam vendors talking to the business app developers to try and get their stuff incorporated. Apps aren't aware of each other. This is a real big one when it comes to Maam. So if I build something in QuickOffice and I now need to, let's say I want to write a blog. I build it in QuickOffice, I write my post. Well, now I want to deal with an image. So I go to my camera, I go to something else, and I edit that image. Well, how do I combine that if it's enterprise data? Because, by the way, I have an enterprise WordPress, and I need to mix those data, and then I'm going to use the WordPress plugin. They're not aware of each other because of the way the sandbox is done. Now you're starting to see people create sandboxes that are extended and sort of wrap around a set of apps. It works. It's a little kludgy. It doesn't always work well, but it's a start of what we're going to talk about next. It doesn't usually take an extensive rewrite, but if you don't talk to your developers and you hand them your Maam stuff and you say, hey, we need you to incorporate this into your app, they may have to pull a bunch of stuff out to add the new stuff in. Talk to your developers early. Let them know what's going on. And we already talked about explaining to security. How many people have tried to explain any of this stuff to security? Anybody? 1, 2. It's not a lot of fun. They don't really get it. They're stuck in the legacy piece, which makes it very difficult because your CTO says, well, why do I want to fight this? And oh, by the way, if you think security's bad, try explaining this to legal. If you have compliance issues, it's a really long discussion and a lot of meetings. So let's talk about one other thing that's sort of like Maam, mobile virtualization. 3 big vendors are Enterprise, VMware, OK Labs. They create dual persona on your device. So if I have an Android, an LG device, and I have VMware MVC, mobile virtualization, I don't remember what the C stands for. I apologize. I turn on my device, and I actually have a container, and it's dual persona. One's business, one's personal. they can lock the business container, and my personal apps are fine. It works. Enterprise does something similar on here. Enterprise also came out with a solution for iOS, which is based upon web apps. So it's HTML5 front ends, essentially, sort of like the VDI and all that stuff that we talk about. Here's the problem. You're going to make a phone call. How many of you want to figure out which persona you're in? Anybody? How many of you want to think before you make a phone call to your kids because they've separated it out, and they may be charging you? You may actually have 2 phone numbers depending upon which solution. How many of you want to figure out, oh, wait a second, that's my business desktop, let me change? Or I need 2 versions of an app. I need the personal app because my daughter sends me a paper that she needs me to proofread. Okay, so I open up QuickOffice. I need the same thing on my enterprise side. So now I have 2 versions of QuickOffice. What if I open it on the business side now? But I can't now send it out to my personal side because we have limitations to that. Now, there are places that this makes sense. This appeals to a lot of CTOs right now because they say it's a simple way to solve the problem. I still think you're going to get FUIT. Why do I want 2 personas? Why do I want to figure out what I'm using? Why do I want to get 2 phone numbers? In some cases, business is literally going to separate your phone. And by the way, carriers love this because they get to double charge for data or double charge for voice. What a scam that is, right? You know, and by the way, you can do it without 2 phone numbers. It just happens to be the way that they do it and that they track it. So what's next? What's coming? MIM. It's all about the data. You heard this yesterday. There was a great session with, I'm gonna forget, I guess it was, Dan Stafford did a great session, and then there was a second session right after him on consumerization of IT and FUIT and all that stuff. It's about the data. What's an enterprise care about? What's their asset besides you as a worker? It's really their data. And how do you protect that? And that's what MIM is all about. The good news if you do MIM right is you only need 1 copy of an app. I have QuickOffice, but because my policy follows the data, so when you talk about MIM, policy is following your data. It knows whether I have corporate data or personal data, and it reacts differently. So when I have corporate data and I open up QuickOffice, maybe I can't take a screenshot. Maybe I can only use corporate email. Maybe I can't put it in Dropbox. But then I open up the note my daughter sent me with the Word file, and I can do whatever I want with that because the policy on that is it's open, it's free. Data can be anywhere. How's that happen? It's always encrypted. By the way, one of the reasons that this is a good thing is we're not just talking about, I deal with mobile and tablets all the time, but we're not just talking about these 2 things anymore. If your data is always encrypted, do you care if it's on your work laptop? Do you care if it's on your home laptop? What if it goes to Dropbox and it's already encrypted? Data can actually exist anywhere because the keys aren't anywhere. That's what you control, the encryption keys. And data can traverse apps because the policies with the data, when I start that blog post and now I go to edit that image, I can do that because the policy was on the data. And then I can go to my WordPress client and put it up in my corporate blog, not my personal one. And then later on I can do another blog post personally because it's open. That policy actually follows the data.
So aren't you making, and I love this idea, but aren't you making a fundamental assumption that the app ecosystem will honor that data security model and that it's a standard? Not
So Harry likes to tee me up with good questions. And he already has the answer because we had this discussion the other day. This is no different from Maam. The people who are going to win MIM are going to release their SDK, their API, as an open standard, similar to what VMware did with their server hypervisor as opposed to ESX. And they're going to try and get everybody they can. It's not going to cost you anything. So where that goes, because before I finish answering that question, is we're not there yet. That's the biggest issue. This is what people are starting to see now. Good MIM is 2 years off. Why? Enterprises, first of all, are afraid of encryption. We've been talking about encryption for 20 years. The biggest debate was, well, I don't have enough processing. I don't have the processors to encrypt this. It's going to be a pain in the butt to manage the keys. How do I do all this? Well, we're in a conference where we talk about virtualization. You got a bunch of vendors sitting out there that can spin up as many servers and processors as you need. You have AWS, you now have the Google Cloud, everything else. You have hybrid clouds and private clouds in enterprises. If somebody tells you they don't have processors to do that, say what happens when the business asks you for something. You can spin that up in an hour, 2 hours, maybe it's 10 minutes, maybe it's a day. But virtualization has enabled that, and it's no longer an excuse. Doesn't mean they want to do it. It's still going to be a fight. But that's where you're going to actually see more of a challenge, Harry, I think, than you're going to see with the apps. Because I think what Maam does, Maam is the stepping stone to MIM. So mobile application management helps us get to mobile information management. Because there'll be a time when Harry, and I keep picking on him, decides to give away his SDK. He's not going to charge for it, because it's to his advantage to get every app possible in his store to control it. Well, I'll say it. Guess what? They actually got a data product too. They showed it to us a little while ago. Maybe they'll be the first ones who have a good answer for MIM. Maybe they won't. There are other people who are looking at it. I'm not really at liberty to say on some of those. But this is coming. This is what you have to look at for the future. But we're at a VDI conference. So let's get this poll, because there's a poll that Colin's taking for how many times I say crapplication. I think that's 2 or 3 now. But VDI, if you build a crapplication, they'll run. VDI is not designed for mobile. I don't care what every other session here says. It doesn't work very well. You put Outlook for me on here. I don't care if you use the Citrix Zen Touch, Zen Mobile stuff that puts it on here. I don't care if you use FrameHawk or something else. It's still Outlook. How many of you love to use Outlook today? It's your favorite email client? I actually have 1 hand, 2 hands, 3, okay. How many of them want to use it on a screen this size? Because, by the way, chances are it may not format for this screen. How about if we do Excel where the screen size, okay, well, this is a high-definition screen, Galaxy Nexus 7, for those who care. A lot of cells are going to be on the screen if you bring it on here. Is that what you want to deal with? It's a great way if you have to deal with an app for 5 or 10 minutes a day. There are apps that are going to take time for you to change. They're going to be legacy. But how do you get those legacy apps over? Well, your mobile users are going to look at them and find a way to get around it if you don't. They'll use it for a while. They may even be happy because, hey, I got to carry my 1.3-pound iPad home. I got to carry around my 1.4-pound Samsung Galaxy Tab home. Great, but it wears off pretty quick. So it's a great idea, but this will have your users running around you and doing FUIT very quickly if you don't find a way to mobilize those applications. So we started talking about crapplications. What is a crapplication? And I'm going to show you a couple of slides, but I'm actually going to demo one. I don't think Jack's going to like it, but that's beside the point. A crapplication, apps you hate to use. Everybody has them. I'll give you an example of an app that everybody hates to use on their desktop. How many people love to use SAP? How many people's corporations have figured out how to make SAP easy for you to use? SAP is a crapplication, and by the way, SAP knows it. SAP right now has over 200 SAP apps that they've built internally and that they're also selling to people or giving if you have a contract with them to enable you to use them on these devices. They've boiled down the functionality so you can actually do that. What makes it a crapplication? The UI, the user experience, or scope creep, my favorite. You get into a meeting, you design something, and before you know it, you have everything in the kitchen sink in there. So let's take a look at a few crapplications. Anyone seen this? This is a power nap application available on the iPhone. Anybody figure out what button you're supposed to push to do anything on there? I know how to change from daytime power nap to evening power nap. By the way, the numbers don't exactly work the way you think they would. And the play, pause, ambience, this is impossible to use. Right? Someone designed this. There are too many buttons. If you're not doing usability when you create an app, it turns into a crap application. Your people need to know where to click. If they can't figure out where to click within 30 seconds of opening something, they're going to close it and look for something else. It's not the same as the desktop. They know how to use these devices. Where do I click? If it takes too much time to figure out, it's just not worth it. So let's talk about user experience. If the user experience is bad, what if I don't have a network connection? Does it work offline? How many clicks does it take me to do something? What if I can't find what I'm looking for? Users find a way around the app. They'll use something else. This slide actually came, I did the Enterprise 2.0 conference that I spoke at last month, and this is their app. Front page looks okay, right? There's some nice things there. But you can see there are 3 buttons, so if you've used an app, you know that there are 3 screens. These are your 3 screens. They're not laid out well. You can't find everything you're looking for. And by the way, this is the home page. I put the sponsor on the home page, but I have other stuff that I want on the home page. My map's on the last page. Why wouldn't I put my map on the first page so people can find where they're going? You look at this app, and by the way, it crashed all the time too. It was not a lot of fun to use. But let's talk about scope creep even better. Anybody here from New York? Anybody here have the New York City Way app? It's an awesome app. I absolutely love the app. I got it when it first came out. Mayor Bloomberg did a competition. They opened up a bunch of the information that was available in New York. They said, write apps around it, and they built this. Except when they built it, it was one screen. And it was great. I use it for my parking. This app alone in the last month has saved me about $50 just in parking fees. I don't even know that the parking thing it's not on the first page, it's not on the second or the third page. I can do shortcuts and create my stuff. Impossible to find. There was actually a search function in the top left where I type parking. That's how I got to it. But this started as a good app, and somebody thought it was a good idea to add everything else to it. In a layout like this, it doesn't work. It's the meeting where people shoehorn stuff in. Hey, let's build to the requirements, and then my users do this. Can we just add this one more piece of functionality? So, how do you build an app? You focus on the users. Okay? If you don't know what the user is doing and what they want their outcome to be, you can't build a great app. When you're building a mobile app, figure out what your user needs to do where they are. At Sanofi, we have iPads with our salespeople. The app that we built for them doesn't have all the functionality that the desktop app has, because they can come home and fill out the extra stuff on their desktop, but when they go to meet somebody, they only need certain functionality. That's how you keep the scope where it is. You figure out what the user is going to do with it. Bless you. So you figure out what they're trying to do, you figure out where they're going to do it, and what are the objectives? What are you trying to achieve? This is the hardest thing to come up with. An objective is different from a requirement. An objective is an outcome. And when you do that and you limit scope, you can build an app versus a crap application. You lose sight of any of these things, you're dead meat. How much functionality does your user need? How many people here use Word, at least weekly? How many people here use more than 20 functions in Word? Okay, about 2% of the people who raise their hands who use Word, 2% use more than 20 functions. Anybody have a good guess on how many functions are in Word? Just Word. We'll leave Excel and everything else out. Anybody want to take a guess? 500? You're close. We'll go with a gazillion. If you actually go through Word, there are over 1,000 functions. I stopped counting after a while. Do your users need all those in the field? No. Their goal is to write a doc. Maybe they need track changes. Maybe they need a few other things. Build the functionality that they need, not the entire functionality of the desktop app. What people like to do is they like to give everything. Drink from the fire hose. Here's how you do it. Well, let's talk about appifying the enterprise. What's it all about? It's all about the data. I told you that earlier with MIM, but it's the same thing with apps. You don't want to build a crap application. You want to build an app. You look at your data. You build an API to access that data. You open that data up to the people in your organization. A bunch of them want to play with it because they want to make their jobs easier. That's when we talk about consumerization of IT. They're looking to do the job the best way they know how. Wrap identity around it. Security is important. They shouldn't have access to data that they don't need. Build apps that access the data through the API and prove identity. Remember we talked about security before? Get them involved in the beginning. When you're building an app, if you talk to security first and they get a seat at the table, they're much more happier when you're done. There's not a very long discussion when you're dealing with it. And this last piece, know what your business objectives are. And by the way, this means understand what the case study is. Let me give you an example. I was talking to a company recently that was building an app. And they said, well, we want to do BYOD. One of the things we need to be able to do is look at an Excel spreadsheet. So we need to be able to read Excel files. Okay, no problem, but that's a requirement. Tell me what you actually want to do. What's your case study? What is your objective? Nobody said anything. A week later, a couple new people in the room, we asked the same question. Oh, we have this spreadsheet that gets sent out to salespeople every week that's got a pivot table. I said, okay, I can't help you. I don't have software, business software on here that can read a pivot table in an Excel that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 to 5,000 cells worth of data. I can't do it for you. But they didn't want to say that. So we couldn't meet their objective, but they didn't even know what their business case was. Make sure you involve the business. It's a partnership. By the way, involve the users too. Usability testing does not mean IT. As much as you think it does, you're all technical. I have people all the time ask me which phone should they get. This is a Galaxy Nexus running Jelly Bean. It's a beautiful phone. It's light. It's actually lighter than the iPhone. It's a little bit thinner. It's a nice phone. Not everybody loves Android. I bought my mother a phone. I bought her an iPhone. Why? She doesn't tweak. She doesn't want to change everything. She doesn't care as much. All she cares about is, can she open the app? Can she close the app? Does it do what it needs? You're IT. You're used to playing with stuff. You are not the target user for most of the apps you build. Remember that, or what happens? FUIT. And actually, we're going to stop here for a second just because I want to show you guys. How many people have the mobile app for BriForum loaded? It's actually created by Taptera. Okay. Keep your hand up if you're running it on iOS. Okay. Who's running on Android? Anybody? What's your experience?
It's a little choppy.
Okay.
Crashed. Deleted.
Crashed, deleted. This is the exact same app. Let's see if we can actually get it to run without. Unfortunately, it stopped. We won't report it this time. Do it again. Okay. Taptera makes some beautiful software. They're an iOS company. My guess is they contracted out for this one. Anybody notice anything interesting about this? There are 5 different selections here. There are only 3 here. By the way, this is a fast phone. Running Jelly Bean, this phone works really nicely. All of you have iOS phones. Know how easy it is to scroll, find your apps. If I do the same thing on here, for those of you that can see it, how many of you want to use this app? And by the way, I'm lucky. I get most devices. I get to play with them. My goal is to live with this phone for 2 weeks and use my iPhone as little as possible. It doesn't work with Keynote, so it gets used for that. You know what I used day one? I used what they gave out here, which had the list of all the sessions. A heck of a lot easier than my iPhone. By the way, on iOS, and hopefully this doesn't screw this all up, but don't get me wrong. Looks great here because this is AirPlay. Look what happens when you hold this app landscape. I don't know if you can see that. It's still in portrait. They didn't think about it. They have all this real estate, and they didn't use it to know the orientation of the device. Now, let's see if this works getting back into the application, into Keynote. Hey, it worked. Now let's see if the remote works. Control slideshow. Oop, I am not. Plug's not plugged all the way in. Sorry about that. Okay, you should see it now. Excellent. And it tells me what slide I'm on. By the way, I'm controlling this through Bluetooth. I didn't want to actually go over the Wi-Fi network. This will actually work through Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. It's called Keynote Remote. And it's currently syncing, so it's connected, but we'll run it from here for the moment. So one of the things you have to do here. Sure.
So the previous slide, you're talking about built into your applications, built an API to access data. What vendors do you recommend to help with that? Because I mean, I have no idea how to build an API, right?
Okay. I don't expect you to know how to build an API. If you're a small company, it's not something you want to learn expertise. There are a bunch of vendors out there. Apogee is a well-known one. They do a great job. There are a couple others, escape me off the top of my head. Harry. So Mastery does a couple, the answer is you don't have to build all this yourself. Apogee will partner with you, will actually help you with this stuff. And my Keynote remote did not like that, so we're going to restart the remote. But work with a vendor. There are a lot of vendors out there that will help you do that. You're not actually you're building apps that access the API. The API is not actually in the app. What you do is, and I talk about this a lot, open your data up, free it to the people in your company, build an API to it, and by the way, let people access that API. I talked to another company that's about the size of us. We're 110,000 people. They did this, and when they did this, what they found was they actually had somebody in Asia Pac who built an app. They were building their own, but because they opened the API up, somebody actually built an app that they hadn't expected, they hadn't anticipated. They gave them the enterprise development key, which is one of the things that you need when you're doing an iOS app, because they're an iOS shop. And they have thousands of people using this app because it was something that somebody in their spare time wanted to do. That's the power of putting an API, putting identity, and letting your data be free. Because you won't just be the people doing it. You'll have people who get excited about, can I make my life easier? If you went to Dan Stafford's thing yesterday about FUIT, people find a way around things very easily. If you give them access to the data and you allow them to build apps, They're going to do it because it makes their job easier. They become more productive. They like it. If it means more family time, more other stuff. And guess what? You can use that app for other people. It sounds silly, but it's a great way to look at appifying the enterprise. But it requires that you let go of legacy thinking. Okay? Just because your company's always done things that way doesn't mean you have to do that. It's an oxymoron to build something based upon business requirements without the business case, without the use case, without the objectives. Requirements and objectives have to meet up. Because someone in the room says, oh, I really like the fact that in Word, I get word count. Well, what if word count doesn't matter to your users and they're just trying to get stuff done? Was that part of the business objective? Was that part of the business case? That's scope creep and everything else. You can't develop a good app, you end up with a crap application. So if we're talking about developing apps, one of the things we hear all the time, HTML5 versus native. I like to talk about hybrid. If you went to Dan Saffer's session yesterday, he talked about HTML5. It's not a religion. If your company decides how they're going to build apps before they know what the user requirements are, it's going to turn into a crap application. It's that simple. Look at the requirements, figure out the best way to build an app. If your requirement is you need offline access to data, does VDI or does HTML5 help you out? Not currently. That doesn't mean that they won't help you out in the future, somewhat. But look at what you're trying to do. If you have a camera-based app where you're taking pictures, let's say you're an insurance adjuster, does it make sense to do an HTML5 one which doesn't have the same access to your device as a native one does? By the way, you can build that in HTML5. Look at what your user requirements are and make sure that your UI and UX are there, that your users are happy with the app, or else they're going to say FUIT. It's that simple. There's a third one up there, hybrid. A lot of people don't understand hybrid. Hybrid is you take HTML5 and you build your presentation layer. So what I'm showing on the screen right now is a presentation layer. This presentation layer, now of course we're talking about an Apple app, but this presentation layer could work on here. Why create that twice? Build that in HTML5. But then use native hooks to access the stuff we need, like the Bluetooth and everything else that's here. That's a hybrid app. Develop the stuff that you can once, only once. Develop the stuff that you need for the better access for each platform, if you need to. If HTML5 works, use it. If it's the best option for your users. Just don't be religious about it. It's not a debate, because in the end, it's what your users want to use. And if they're not willing to use it, it's your problem. Let's talk a little bit about app development. Be careful you don't get in a quagmire. You know, I can't tell you how many calls I get from companies who do something called MEEP, which is now changed to MADP. These are all these frameworks where you have an outside company build you an app, and they can build it for multiple platforms. It's great. But I'll give you a little hint to know whether they're actually doing this right. If it costs you $70,000 to build an app for a Samsung Galaxy Nexus, because that's what you're doing, or let's just say Jelly Bean, and then you say, well, I'd also like it for iOS, and it costs you another $70,000, they're not using the framework properly, they're building it again. If I use a framework where most of it's reusable, it shouldn't cost the same amount of money to build the same app. It's that simple. Are there people who use the frameworks well? Absolutely. Are there companies that do it well? Yes. But there are a lot of companies that are just horrible at it. And they're going to charge you a lot. The apps don't work well. I mean, I don't want to pick on Taptera, but you saw the difference. My guess is that they outsourced the development for Android. They didn't do a great job. Will they fix it? Well, I complained yesterday, and I got to tell you, their customer support's pretty good. They did fix one thing already. They're working on other fixes. That means they actually care about it. I don't know that this helps Brian or Gabe, because they paid for the app, but you know, at least that's a company, I mean, I like TapTerra. They do some neat stuff, at least on iOS. Any questions about MAP, MEEP, any of that stuff? So let's talk about BYOD. It's the wrong question. Everybody sits there and says, it's not a strategy. People bringing their own device, that's how we're going to do mobile, is really not a strategy. If IT enables users with the right tools, they don't need to bring their own device. Doesn't mean they won't want to, but they don't need to. Doesn't mean you can't do BYOD, but BYOD is a response to crap applications and crapware. It's that simple. I can do stuff faster on my device than the work device you give me. And by the way, unless you do it right, your data's wide open, it's sitting in Dropbox, it's everywhere. And I guarantee you that your data's in Dropbox already. I'll let you take the picture before I go to the next slide. And here's the really dirty little secret about BYOD. It doesn't save you money. IBM reported recently that they're actually spending more money on BYOD. There's only one company right now that saves money, Cisco. Cisco's doing a bunch of stuff, but guess what? They've cut out subsidies. They've done a bunch of other things. They own NAC. Hopefully they can do it well. From what we saw yesterday, I don't think they can. Dan Stafford said they haven't really gotten NAC running. But that's what they try and tell you. And Cisco's not the only people who try and talk about NAC. But it doesn't save you money. Here's what you have to understand about BYOD and how people sell it to you. Your users will be more productive. How many people have heard that? If you do BYOD, your users will be more productive. Your users aren't more productive, they're working longer hours. Productivity means, if you look at it from the basis of how much you got done, sure it is. But they've done studies and they show that on average, a worker who has a mobile device spends an extra 7 hours a week working. That's an entire business day for most people. So are they actually more productive, or are they just working a lot more? Now, I'll pimp something I did yesterday, I should say on my blog. I did a swag on this. Right now, they say the average user who has a mobile device makes $3,200 for a company a year. Those people who read InfoWorld, Galen Grumman did a much better swag than I. We've been talking about for a couple of months since my post came out, where he says between $3,000 and $13,000 per user who has a device. How much does one of these devices cost? If you don't pay a carrier subsidy, this is a $600 device. If you pay data and voice for this device, you're talking about another $1,200. You're still going to profit on every single user. So decide how you want to do it. Don't walk in thinking it's going to save you money. And that actually leads to something that we're starting to see, which is called COPE. Corporate-owned, personally enabled. These are devices that we give you, and we say, play Angry Birds on it. Do your Facebook on it. But oh, by the way, if I want to use MDM with this device, I'm going to wipe it. Guess what security and compliance love about that? You don't have to talk to, yeah, we can wipe the device. We can do what we want. We have to tell the user. We build that in our contract. But we own the device. The rules are different when you own the device. You're starting to see a lot of companies looking at this because they realize they're not saving money. And by the way, this is not necessarily the right way to do it. I'm seeing this a lot more and a lot of people talking about it. You can do BYOD. You can be successful. The suggestion I'll make when you're dealing with BYOD, so you don't answer with FUIT and you don't answer with IT walking out the door, is you do something called Manage BYOD. Not every Android device is the same. Samsung has a program called Samsung Safe, which essentially means it's an enterprise program where they built a bunch of APIs that make it almost as secure as an iPhone. In some cases, they'll tell you more secure than an iPhone. There's another company called 3LM that's doing something similar. They build APIs that allow you to access it and do that stuff. That's what we call managed BYOD. It's much easier to tell people, hey, I'll give you a $100 subsidy for your phone, or I'll pay for your bill for part of the month, but you can only choose from these devices. You give them a choice of an Android device, or 2 Android devices, and an iOS device, they're going to be pretty happy. Do you have any idea how hard it is to deal with a Galaxy Nexus? This is unlocked, so it's an AT&T Galaxy Nexus, a Verizon Galaxy Nexus, a Motorola Razr, an HTC Evo 4G. By the way, each one of those had a different version of Android on it, with a different set of security things that you can talk to. Managed BYOD helps you solve that and helps you meet those needs. At least you know what you're dealing with. Because you have to remember something. The enterprise IT adoption cycle. This look familiar to anybody? How your company works? And while we're talking about the end, take some pictures. Enjoy. This is actually something created by Simon Wardley, but he said I had to take credit for it because he didn't want to take credit for what he wrote. So this is the enterprise IT adoption cycle, but there's another thing that's come into play in the last 5 years. The zombie apocalypse. This is what we thought it would look like, but isn't this what it looks like now? We talk about writing laws to deal with all that stuff and all that. So what this leads to, and these will stay in the slide. This is when they go up online, unless Brian takes them out. Let's talk a little bit about strategy, because my whole point here was how you build a strategy. If mobile isn't part of your strategy, you're going to fail. There's just no other way to look at it. You're going to fail right now because companies that aren't looking at mobile don't get what's going on. Coca-Cola Bottling gave iPads to a bunch of their users. And by the way, you know what they did when they gave it to them? They said, you have to install Angry Birds, because they wanted to make sure that their users were comfortable with the swiping, with hitting buttons on it, understanding the touch interface. So the first thing they had to do was play Angry Birds. And they found that their revenues went up 40% because you could hand the device to somebody and you can actually deal with it. If your strategy is mobile only, you are going to fail. Because mobile alone is not the panacea to solve your company's woes. It just ain't going to happen. It's not a mobile strategy, it's your strategy, and it's how you fit mobile into your company's overall strategy that helps you succeed. How do you make stuff work? I like to preach mobile first. Mobile first is not mobile only. If you develop an app that focuses on the user and what they want to do for a mobile device, it's pretty easy to actually take that app and put it on a desktop. We do it all the time. You've already designed the app. You know what the user wants to do. For the 20% of users who need the over 1,000 functions in Office, great, they can use the application. The other 80% are going to be happy using it on this device or using it on their laptop. It doesn't matter. It's much harder to go the other way. When you take an existing app and you don't scale it down and focus on the user, you end up with a crap application. There's no other way to look at it. It's about enabling your user. If you can't figure that part out, that's where you're running into trouble. It's how do I do my work anywhere, anytime? How do I do this when I'm on the plane? How do I do it when I'm sitting out in the hallway out there, whether or not wireless works or not? This is actually a pretty good conference for wireless. But if you've ever been to Interop or some of the bigger conferences, you walk into a room like this, you can't connect to anything. And oh, by the way, AT&T and Verizon don't help either. How do I enable them? How do I look at all that stuff to make sure that you have the data to be successful wherever you are and get your work done? I have 10 minutes left, I think. Do I have 10 or 15? Okay. I'm going to walk you through a real quick case study. I actually talk about this a little bit in my blog, but let's imagine buying a car for a minute. Anybody buy a car recently? Okay. Was it a pleasant experience?
Never is.
Never is. So what happens when you buy a car? You walk into a dealership, there are a bunch of sharks there waiting, they decide who gets to pounce first. They come meet you. Hopefully you don't have to, take the handkerchief out, wipe your hand off after you shake their hand. They try and figure out what you want. They ask you if you've seen any of the vehicles. They may talk about your needs. But what's important to them? What's your name? What's your phone number? What's your address? They take you back to their desk and they start writing that stuff down. Then they offer to get you brochures. So now you're trying to leaf through brochures. You may have 2 or 3 of them. Maybe you have your wife with you, so you're handing them back and forth. You decide on a car. You decide, okay, I'd like a, last night I was in a dark purple Mazda. It was technically a racing car that was barely street legal, but it was a heck of a car. But I want a dark purple car. Not sure why, it looked black, but that's what I want. What do they have to do? They go to this big ream of paper, and they start paging through to see what's on the lot. Because if they have that car on the lot, they want to take you out for a test drive in that. And once they find that car, they go back to this big kiosk that has all the keys, they key it into the computer, and hopefully that one pops up. And by the way, if you have questions, hopefully they know how to answer them on the test drive if they go with you. If they don't, you have to wait till you come back to do that. And then what happens? Let's negotiate. Let's sit down. By the way, they have to retype in all your information. They ask the same questions. And maybe you reach a price, maybe you reach an agreement, and then you go to the back office with the finance person, and you do it all over again. And you wonder why, wait a second, I did this up front. I have a piece of paper that has the numbers on it. They may tell you they're different, but how do you do that? So let's imagine mobile enabling that for a second. You walk into a dealership, they say hello, they introduce themselves. Hi, I'm Brian Katz. Hey, great to meet you, I'm looking for a car. Great, what's your name? They put it on their tablet while they're there. Can I just get a phone number and address? Boom, it's done. It's in the system now. What kind of car were you looking for? Maybe they have a questionnaire where they hit a couple boxes, maybe they don't. You tell them, I was looking at this Mazda sports car, but I'm also interested in, do they still make the Protege? Mazda Protege or whatever the Mazda minivan is. Hey, great, let me give you the brochures. And I walk and I hand it to them. And those 2 brochures are on there. They can now look at them. They can now look at those brochures on there and they can leave. They get to hold it in their hand. It's interactive. Tech specs are there. Heck, you may have a second one that you hand to the wife. Maybe they're linked so you can say, look at this page. You had the flick it stuff that AppSense showed you earlier. Maybe you can flick one thing to the other one just so that they can see what you're looking at if you're with a partner or something else. Great, I want to do a test drive. Okay, what color were you looking for? Which car? I look it up here. I have an instant inventory on my lot because I have a server back there. We built them a server. They have to log the stuff in. Where do you think that big printout, with all, it's usually still the holes on the side, if you've seen those dot matrix printers? It's right here. I don't have the blue one, but I have the green one. Would that work for the test drive? Yeah, that would be fine. They pull out a key, NFC, they hold it up to there and they check it out right there. They walk you out. Right now, we have a seamless experience. You haven't sat down yet if you didn't want to. You didn't have to wait for him to find it. He didn't take 15 minutes to look through his inventory. You go for a test drive. Guess what? You keep this with you in the test drive. You stop at a stoplight. Hey, what's the 0 to 60? They can look it up right there. You can hand it to your partner if they're not driving, or you can look at it if they're driving. Ask another question. You can look at the tech specs. You have it all with you. Nice and compact. You get back. You decide you want to buy it. You sit down at a table. They already have half the data in there. They put the rest in. They can show financing on this. They're done. They send you back to finance. What do? They send the data back there. Maybe finance doesn't have an iPad. Maybe finance is working from a desktop. But they already have your data and everything in the system. You can move a heck of a lot more people through your organization that way. You can make the experience a heck of a lot more pleasant. But I did everything the same way. All I did was mobile enable it. So when we talk about mobile is part of your strategy, but it's not your strategy, that's what I'm talking about. That's how you do mobile. Questions? We got 10 minutes, it's all yours, or whatever you want to know. You can ask about vendors. You can ask about anything I put up on the board. We'll go here and then Colin. You go first.
Okay. I don't have much of a dev background, so it might sound kind of stupid, but when you talk about, writing an application for Android, costs $70,000, and then you want it for iOS, costs $70,000 more, they're not using the framework. Can you describe that framework, that multi-OS output framework, and do you have any specific examples of the frameworks that we should look at, or we should partner with to do it very well?
Great question.
Didn't sound too stupid?
No, it didn't sound stupid at all. Part of it depends on how big a company you are. Because if you're a big enough company, you're going to have some development in-house, you're going to have some development outside, you're going to go to other people to develop it. And what you want to do is look at what they do. I'll be honest, lay my cards on the table. I'm not a fan of the frameworks. I'm really not, because I haven't found too many people who do it well. There are a couple, but part of that is you doing your due diligence. Make them show you what they've already done. Find out what they're going to charge you for it and whether they meet their date or anything else. There are dozens of companies that do it. I'll give you a comparison, which will show you my biasness towards it. Adobe Air. You ever use an Adobe Air application? You remember, what is it? The Twitter one. TweetDeck, an Adobe Air application that didn't always install correctly, didn't always work correctly. Sometimes you had to update Adobe Air to get the application, but it was written with a single framework. It doesn't mean people don't do it well. But if you want to ask privately, I can do that. But Colin.
In keeping with the theme of having mobile be part of an overall strategy, how are you seeing the growth of mobile computing affecting traditional desktop management and purchasing life cycles?
I'm seeing two things. I'm seeing people think that a tablet is a desktop replacement, and they haven't done their research yet. If you don't know what your users do, you can't just give them a tablet, even if you have a nice keyboard like I do, and expect them to be identical to what it is. It is a different experience. You have to build an ecosystem around it. You have to find the apps that allow them to accomplish what they're trying to do. That being said, if you figure out why you're giving people stuff and what you're trying to accomplish, I see companies being extremely successful in rolling out thousands of iPads, thousands of, and let's be honest, it's still an iPad market, although I do like this form factor. There are things I don't like about the Nexus 7, but I really do like this form factor. I like 7 inches. I like it better than the Kindle Fire. But they're rolling out these devices and they're making people productive and efficient. And that works and that helps. So people who are doing it for the right reasons are very happy. It's the same thing with VDI or anything else. If you build a good business case, it can be successful. If you don't, people revolt. They won't use your device. They'll use their own device. It doesn't change what happens. Does that answer the question, Colin?